Okay, so 21st century was a little bit vague, but seemed like a good idea when I submitted it to the conference plan. Enlightened Perl for Systems Administrators is possibly a more accurate title. The new Perl Enlightenment is what we're referring to these past sort of 5 or 6 years when everybody kind of accepted that Perl 6 was this fascinating research project but fundamentally becoming a different programming language, and development of Perl itself picked up again massively. And there have been all sorts of exciting things coming out of that, some of which I will get to, most of which your apps developers will be very excited about and you probably don't care about. That's also fine. So I'm Matt Trout, known online generally as MST, or possibly that English bastard.
Excuse me, would you mind moving over?
Not always known for my tact online, but never mind. I work for a company called Shadowcat Systems, who I should mention at least because our managing director is much more organised than me, and that's why I had a train ticket and a hotel reservation. And we've largely, our business is consulting to companies who are developing and deploying significant scale Perl applications, basically acting as technology experts so that they can focus on the business domain and the parts that are actually essential to making them money. So I get this every single time. Oh, isn't Perl like a legacy language? Haven't we seen from this? Well, the big problem you have with Perl is Perl gets used a huge amount on the back office. Something a lot of people don't know, which I'm amazed nobody's shouting about, is the company that produced Django also produced a Perl framework called Gantry. Django was developed to produce all the front-facing media sites, and then all of their back-office systems were written in Perl. But the Python people shouted about Django and nobody really said anything about Gantry, so everybody's forgotten it existed. On the upside, I can happily report that the map script archive 4mail.pl line noise crap style of Perl is finally dying a death as we have a whole new generation of developers who actually know how to program. All the people who haven't have now gone to PHP and Rails. I feel sorry for the competent people working with those technologies. Hi, we know your pain. Sorry, guys. But there's still a hell of a lot of new build being powered by Perl. A lot of the BBC stuff, iPlayer, the magazines.com, all of their business systems, booking.com are absolutely huge and donated a large whack of cash towards the development of the Perl 5 VM because they depend on it so heavily. And the nice thing about Perl is the community is mature, the practices are mature. We've made a lot of the mistakes and learned from them. And as I hope most systems people here will say, things being declared dead is often an indicator that it's finally stable enough to be sensible in production. The other nice thing is, because as a community we're more and more trying to provide consistency and standardization, what you have now is a converging platform where you can rely, yes, there may be 3 million different ways to do it, but there's usually one that your decent Perl developers are using by default, which means that you actually have some degree of being able to bring people onto a code base and not have them go, oh my god, what did the last guy do? Well, okay, that always happens. Everybody else's code is crap. You know this from any time you try and maintain somebody else's stuff. But at least now it's somebody else's crap on top of libraries you might already have encountered. A big part of this convergence is the Catalyst Web Framework, DX Class ORM and the Moose Object System, which are all pretty good. I'd like to reinvent large chunks of the first two, and I'm trying to do so over the next year or two, but this is the price of being a maintainer of a piece of software. You look back at what you did 2 years and go, oh my god, what an idiot was I. But it is all very stable, very scalable, and works very well. And amusingly enough, while people might claim Netcraft confirms that Perl is dying, most of Netcraft's recent job advertisements want Catalyst, DBX Class and Moose. So maybe not quite dead at least. So I say it's a great time to be writing Perl applications. But this is a talk for sysadmins, so making the apps developers bounce and squeal is not the point of the exercise. So this is a talk in two parts. And the first part is trying to let those apps developers bounce and squeal without you needing to kill them for it. We all know what happens when you let an apps developer loose. They go, oh, 3 million libraries, and now how do we deploy them? Well, funnily enough, we've actually been doing quite a lot of work on making things sensibly deployable. And there's a lot of good practices that are converging now. One of the key things from that is a module called local lib. Now, local lib basically automates away almost, depends how you look at it, of the annoyances of deploying to a specific directory so that you can keep your applications libraries out of your systems tree. But it does this very simply. It does this, it's just one shell eval, and it sets environment variables that affect the way the Perl toolchain works. The two obvious ones are Perl 5 lib, which controls the module loading, equivalent of class path for those of you stuck over in Java land, and sets up the path so any scripts that came with those modules are found as well. But it also sets two additional variables which control the behaviour of xutils makemaker and module build, which are the two main tools that are used to build and install Perl applications. Now the nice thing about controlling those through environment variables is it doesn't matter what you use to install the modules afterwards. You can use the standard cpan client, you can use the cpan plus client, which a lot of people prefer. If you're working out on custom software or out of a checkout, you can do the configure, make, install process by hand, and because it's environment variable based, it still gets honoured, and the code installs the way you want it to. A local lib is actually also pretty much relocatable, except for one thing, which is there's a file at the root of it which controls module build, and you need to delete that if you're about to relocate it. Local lib will recreate it on next invocation, but having done that, you can put a local lib setup in etc. scan. For development servers, this is an absolute godsend because it means every developer, when they do cpan something, it installs into ~/Perl 5, completely separated from the rest of the system. They're not going to interrupt anything else. They're not going to interrupt other developers. And you're also looking at the pretty much standard at the moment means of setting things up, of writing your makefile.pl is a thing called module install. Now, one of the nice things about module install is it provides a nice simple syntax for declaring what things you depend on and what the versions are. Now, yes, you do have to write this down. What I recommend if your developers forget to write this down is you set them on fire. If management don't let you do that, then you'll have to settle for, well, that's fine, but until the makefile.pl is fixed, your software's broken and I can't deploy it. I repeat this on IRC 3 or 4 times a day to people who've forgotten to keep those up to date. After they've experienced the pain of trying to do everything by hand once, generally they keep things up to date from then on. Now, assuming that has been added and people have been tracking as they go along, module install provides this great facility called auto install. And what auto install does is it adds an extra make target to your make file called installed apps, which means if you need to get the dependencies for a piece of code, you can do perl makefile.pl, make installed apps, and it picks up the cpan client, fires it off, and installs everything that that package needs. Most RT extensions, for example, are now packaged like that, and it's been the standard in Catalyst applications for 2 or 3 years. But you can get a bit more clever though with the addition of local lib. Fire off an eval, get your environment variables in place, makefile.pl, install deps into the location, test and install, and you now have a support directory alongside your app that has all of its dependencies on that weren't already installed system-wide. At which point you've then got a tree that you can basically tar up and throw somewhere. Or tar up, turn into a Debian package, turn into whatever you like. It's just a tree of files, but it has everything you need in it. Now, if you're looking at going for a complete vendor package route, there is also now a lot of motion around a tool called cpan to dist. Cpan to dist is a wrapper around cpan plus's functionality. And CPAN to disk will take a Perl module and go away and not only build a vendor package for that, but build a vendor package for all of its dependencies recursively. So it's very easy with a CPAN to disk invocation to get a directory full of whatever sort of package you use that you can stick into your local app repository or equivalent. And there's a small number of extensions for CPAN to disk now supporting different operating systems. So pretty much no matter what you're deploying on now, I know, yes, FreeBSD isn't in that list, but they have a bunch of tools of their own for doing that and integration with CPAN already. So the practice for FreeBSD stuff, I think, is still generally to follow that approach. There was a man waving at me at the back who presumably correct me on that during the questions.
I will ask you afterwards.
Cool. There's also for CPAN to disk generic.dev and RPM backends. So if you're using the custom log distro or Mutant Debian like Ubuntu, it's very easy to get that going as well. But there's still one thing that does tend to get on people's nerves. I don't know if you guys have done a bunch of CPAN installations recently. If you have, you'll probably have ended up running the CPAN client with that on the end, so that you can actually wade through the swathes of build and test output to find out what's going on. Or even dump it to a log file for later looking and then wading through the build and test output. Or you might end up using script to record everything. And why does this need to be so noisy? I mean, okay, when something goes wrong, it's very useful to have all of that information. But when you're just trying to snap a few modules onto a system and they all work, did you really need 27 pages of spew? Well, Satsuhiko Miyagawa, which I think I pronounced correctly, but he's not here, so nobody will be able to correct me if I didn't, has been doing some fantastic stuff recently in terms of minimal tooling. One of the exciting things he's built is a thing called Plaque, which is a reference implementation of the PSGI specification, which is basically trying to take the concepts behind the Python WSGI stuff, Ruby's rack, and produce a Perl equivalent of that, which is absolutely fantastic, is getting rapid adoption among all of the frameworks, and also provides a lovely script called PlackUp, which will allow you to deploy any PSGI compliant application as fast CGI as web or whatever with a standard thing. I do apologise for going quite quickly through some of this stuff, but there's a fair amount to cover because most people stopped paying attention to Perl about 10 years ago. So I'm trying to bring you up to date on all of this in the space of one talk. And it's probably not going to work, but read the slides later and annoy me down the pub. Anyway, the nice thing about Plaque is that that means we're looking at getting standardised deployment for web applications, as well as being able to standardise how the dependency handling is done. But that's not actually why I want to mention Miyagawa. What I want to mention is Miyagawa is either on too many drugs or not enough, but long may it continue. And he got annoyed with this noisiness of clients. So he wrote a thing called CPAN minus. Because we have CPAN and we have CPAN plus, and CPAN is the standard thing, and CPAN plus does 3 million things, including building vendor packages, which is still fantastic, but CPAN minus does the basic simple stuff that's all you need most of the time. And the wonderful thing about CPAN minus is it's actually a single script. So you can literally do a wget, chmod it, and you've got something that will do installations. And it does installations quietly. It fetches, it configures, it goes, I have dependencies, it fetches, it configures, recurses through, and you just get this. And if CPAN minus ran into any problems during the process of doing that, it did this really, really exciting and amazing thing for making sure you still got the output. It wrote a frickin' log file. So you can still go in and diagnose everything. The other nice thing about CPAN minus is it's much faster to start and much lighter on memory usage, which makes it viable for use on things like DreamHost, who, much though I could strangle them some of the time, are very good value for money for what they do, but do have a process killer that has a tendency to eat CPAN installation processes. and the various Perl toolchain hackers, of which I appear to have accidentally become one over the past year or so, are all quite fond of CPAN-M, so various things are being cleaned up so that where an 80% solution isn't enough for something that should be within the 80% of standard Perl modules, the toolchain's getting cleaned up to support it. So we're seeing a lot of simplification, a lot of things becoming more reliable in the process of that as well. And we like Miyagawa, because he's Ikan and Japanese and really sweet, and really being mean to him would be like kicking a puppy. And so I would say keep a close eye on CPAN-M, grab it, play with it. If it works for your current use cases, fantastic. If it doesn't, go kick that puppy and bitch at Miyagawa. He'll probably fix it for you. And CPAN Miners also has the wonderful thing of actually knowing how to upgrade itself. So if you run that every so often to keep track, because it is being actively developed at the moment, you should hopefully be able to, with a bit of luck and the following wind, when you run into a problem, one self-upgrade later, it'll have gone away because somebody else already found it. So the other thing I wanted to mention is, talking about platform, we're not only seeing natural convergence and standardization happening, but we're now seeing a drive within the community. So the caveat on there's more than one way to do it is now, the motto is there's more than one way to do it, but consistency is good too, which is having a huge effect. One of the things that's come out of this is a thing called Task Kensho. Now, Task Kensho is a working title. The word Kensho pretty much translates to a glimpse of enlightenment. The reason for this is because Kensho is a project that came out of and is driven by the Enlightened Perl organisation, which is a non-profit that I somehow found myself involved with. And the aim of the Enlightened Perl organisation is to promote modern, standard Perl 5, the things that people are already deploying in production. The Perl Foundation has this huge remit. They have to look after the future of Perl 5, the future of Perl 6, trying to work out what's going to be happening 5 years out. Enlightened Perl, we are much more tightly focused. Something doesn't become an Enlightened Perl sponsored project until it's already been widely deployed in production. If we can't look you in the eye and say, people are already running their businesses on this, then we're not going to try and convince you to run yours on it yet either. And Kensho is a thing built out of that, which is taking Catalyst, DBX, Class, Moose, and saying, these are the things you want to use for a given purpose. Yes, there's 3 million things on CPAN that do this. Use this one. This one's great. We've all used it in the real world and it worked. Here's a standard set of extensions. Look at them first. So that means that we're encapsulating the community and business best practices and moving towards there being a platform that you know you can rely on for new Perl development. It's sort of kind of like the J2EE process, except that rather than a company dictating to the rest of the world how to do it and then getting bought out by Oracle, what we're going for is taking what people are already doing and standardising around the things that are already proven working. Which I've heard this works. There's these guys called the IETF who've been quite successful doing that. And this year, it's not quite happened yet, but I hope by the end of this year we will see binary builds of that full platform for every distro supplied through the Enlightened Perl organisation, as well as pick up from within the distro so that they're providing their own packages of them as well. So you should be able to pick your point and unit of standardisation and have something that is stable, a module set that's known good to work together and provides you a solid platform that you can rely on. But in the meantime, to mention the distros, there's been all sorts of exciting things going on. The Debian Perl guys have suddenly noticed that there's this thing called the Perl community and started talking to us. And we've gone, hey, hang on a minute, downstream packages who want to cooperate? Excellent! And there have been lots of conversations around that, and a lot of things improved. I spent an incredibly boring afternoon going through about 25 CPAN modules, fiddling with copyright declarations to save Debian trouble with packaging them. And we're trying to push towards that sort of thing being a standard part of CPAN authors' workflow. So there's a big push. While CPAN is wonderful as a source build system, it's nice to have vendor packages. So we're trying to engage more and more with the distros, and at the moment Debian is the banner example of that. They're even going back and unpicking Debian-ish packaging decisions in terms of the way modules are bundled together and stuff, and separating it out so you get a Debian package per CPAN distribution, so your vendor deployment and your development environment match one-to-one, which makes things a lot easier to deal with. And Debian testing actually now has updated versions of everything. They're doing wonders. They're chasing around after releases. And you're looking at time from something being on CPAN to an updated version being in Debian for any commonly used module being pretty much under a week now. Those guys are doing sterling work. So with a bit of luck, the next version of Debian stable might be stable rather than, well, stable in the geological sense. So yes. There's also been huge strides going on Win32. Now, I know we all try not to think about Win32, or at least I certainly try not to. But it's still kind of important, and Strawberry Perl has done wonders there, because that's a standard community-oriented Perl, shipping a bunch of modules that people are actually using. And Strawberry Perl Professional will be out shortly, which will bundle the entire Kensho stack, and Perl, the Perl IDE written in Perl, which is coming on in leaps and bounds. Fedora, I heard a wonderful thing. Finally, Red Hat have actually given some people who do Perl control of the Perl packages in Fedora. So, in another 3 Red Hat Enterprise, oh god, releases, we might actually see a stable production quality Perl in Red Hat as well. So I'd say that the present and future of Perl deployment is fantastic. So I'm just going to divert slightly here, because something we often face is the old way of deploying Perl web applications tended to be mod Perl. These days we tend to go for fast CGI, and I'd just like to tell you a little story to explain why we tend to go for fast CGI. Back in the day, mod Perl, wonderful, yes, fine. And the modules of the day, this was a few years ago, and then suddenly we had this bug where all of the form fields were typed text, even the uploads and it's like, what's going on here? So I started digging, and I wrote a standalone script, and that worked. So I started digging some more, and I recompiled DBD MySQL with extra debugging, and it was saying everything is a varchar, which is why the form thing was guessing the wrong thing. So I'm going, okay, so I dig some further. And it turns out libmysql client was saying that, so I'm going, what the hell is going on? And so I broke out LDD, as you do. And it didn't show libmysql client.so at all. And I'd upgraded PHP a few days ago and went digging, and PHP had missed the system libmysql client and decided to build its own. Into the binary. Statically linked from a 3.23 MySQL. And that is why I claim mod Perl, mod Python, mod whatever, just don't do it. Use fast CGI. Go away, pop-up box. Right, how long have I got now?
6 minutes.
6 minutes. That's interesting. You claimed me to half an hour rather than right, no, that's fine. So, I was going to talk about scripting tools.
42 minutes.
Right, but we started at 36.
36, I thought.
No, 36.
Okay.
Don't give the presenter a heart attack! That's what the caffeine's for. Right. Excuse me a moment while I breathe. Right, so, it's a great time to be scripting in Perl as well. I mean, Perl is sort of 3 different languages. You have your heavy applications Perl, You have your one-liner stuff and you have your system scripting. And people haven't been paying much attention to system scripting, but it turns out there's a lot of awesome stuff coming in there. But people go, oh yes, you want to get excited about the new stuff. No, this is system scripting, sod excitement. This is systems. Excitement is the apps developer going, wouldn't it be cool if? Well, downtime is exciting. All-nighters are exciting. My landlady thinks excitement is wonderful for bar takings. I'm not so fond of exciting. What you want for systems is stuff that just works and you don't have to think about whether it's going to. So the traditional idiom in Perl, do a file open, check to see if it worked, print to the thing, check to see if that worked. Well, we're seeing a pattern here. Fortunately, so did somebody else, a man called Paul Fenwick who runs Perl Training Australia. And he wrote a module called AutoDie. Paul Fenwick is a believer in Klingon code. It is better to die than to return in failure. So what you do is you put use AutoDie at the top, and then they throw exceptions for you. At which point, you get an exception when something goes wrong, and the AutoDie exceptions have a defined class and a categorization system, which means you can do structured exception handling with it. The Perl system function, the Perl system function comes in for some interesting hate. If you're trying to deal with the return code from system, this is what the documentation recommends. I'm just going to give you a moment to go, what the f now? Because that's what I do every time I try and do that. Or apparently you can check this and use some stuff from POSIX. No! But if you do use AutoDie all, AutoDie will use a module called IPC System Simple, which wraps the system command, and then you can just do that and it'll throw an exception. And it even tests non-zero exit status and gives you an exception on that. And if you have a specific set of exit statuses that are acceptable, if you provide them at the start of the call, it will ignore those but still throw an exception on any other error. And as a Perl 5 version 10.1, AutoDie is a core module. So you don't need to install a single thing to use it once your distro catches up from the geologically stable to the modern stable. But even better, there's this lovely thing called IO-all, which is possibly my favourite module ever for rapid-fire system scripting. It provides one function called I/O. And you can read a file. You can read a file a more elegant way if operator overloading scares you, so you know the people who've been permanently scarred by C++ don't have to see it. You can get it split into lines for you. You can treat the I/O as an array reference and unpack it. You can write to a file by the same method, append to a file, again using a shell-like style. And it also provides change method call styles for the people who are looking at that. So whatever's comfortable for you, because at the end of the day, you are building this script to work and to make sense to you. So use the style that fits your programming style. And it also provides a nice means to add filters onto stuff. It can do deep recursion for you, which might save you a find invocation or three on occasion. And it has some concept of Unix, so if you hand it dash, it figures out if you're reading or writing whether that's stood in or stood out. But the interesting thing about IO-all is it also bolts into a bunch of networking stuff. So you can write a TCP client in it. TCP client one-liner. Better still, TCP server one-liner. Believe it or not, I've actually used that in anger. I used that in anger in order to save some problems for my father. Because my father had completely forgotten what his mail password was. And guess what he was using at that point? And he wanted to escape to Thunderbird. So what we did was, I threw one of these up on a spare IP address. We told Outlook Express to connect to that, and it obediently and conveniently sent his password in plain text to my script. At which point I told him what his password was, and we got sorted out in about 10 minutes. And IO-all will link into LWP as well, the libperl, the standard library for doing HTTP and so on. So you can pull from a web page just as easily as a file. You can provide the protocol as a method call if you're trying to keep things a little bit cleaner. IOO basically abstracts away all of the standard OO and otherwise core Perl stuff. Modules that you'd normally use by hand, those as well, and those as well. Which is why, as the documentation say, IO all is IO all of it. So, hopefully I've convinced you that it might actually be an idea to try writing a few Perl scripts and using some of these libraries. But you then get in the problem of deployment. But these are system scripts. System scripts shouldn't need deployment. If you're going to go that route, you might, if you're at the point where you're having to install all sorts of stuff, you might as well just write the damn thing in bash again, right? So, well, there's par, which takes a leaf out of the Java book and creates basically a big zip archive that's got all of the code in it. And, well, from having trawled through unpacking jar files to try and figure out what the heck is going on, I don't particularly enjoy doing that in Perl either. Par packet is very clever, very powerful, handles a huge number of cases, and it's very flexible, and we're back onto exciting, and no. So we need an alternative. The alternative is AppFatPacker, which I have been working on recently. So FatPacker, you get a little script called FatPack. You tell it to trace a script. And what it does is it hooks into Perl's module loading, and you get a file out the other side that has a list of every file that your script loaded. It only compiles the script, doesn't run it. So if your script has an rm-rf at the bottom, you're probably safe. It probably shouldn't do that anyway, but that's not the point. And then we have a command called packlist4. Now the .packlist file is the unsung hero of CPAN installations. Sadly, they don't exist in vendor packages, but anything that's installed via CPAN, there will be a .packlist file which gives you all of the files that were installed as part of that CPAN invocation. You can use this to track down weird CPAN versions your apps developers have done, uninstall them, set fire to the developer, and then put them in a local lib in future. So you've got those files, so you ask FatPacker to take a trace file, figure out which pack lists are relevant. So now you've got a set of pack list files which have lists of files in them. Now, you can say, build me a tree into a directory, in this case called fatlib, which takes the pack list, pulls all of those files, and dumps them into that tree. Now, the reason this is important is that when you've got something, things like the locale modules for Perl, you have one top-level locale module you load, and then it runtime loads whatever is the appropriate for your locale. Which means if you want a reliable bundled deployment, you need the whole of the distribution, not just the modules that were loaded on one particular machine. So taking it from the pack list ensures that, because you get all of the files that came together, and they're all bundled into this lib. Once you've got that, you can now deploy your script and rsync across the fatlib, and that will work fine, but we can go on better. We can go on better with FatPackFile. FatPackFile takes your list of files and creates a begin block. Now, a begin block in Perl, much like in awk and so on and so forth, runs at the point where the script is initializing. So what it does is it dumps out a giant hash of the source code of all of the modules in that tree, and then it pushes code into Perl's include list. Because Perl has this wonderful feature where if it finds a piece of code in the include list rather than a directory name, it asks that, do you know how to resolve this file? At which point, we can reach back into the set that we had dumped out, open a file handle to the string, and return that, at which point, Perl sees the fat-packed copy of the module as if it was on disk. Which means, you take the fat-packed file output, cat it onto the front of your script, and you now have a single file script that you can just SCP across onto a system. Now that gives you serious, simple deployment, because now you just copy the script around, don't have to worry about anything. And it also provides this fascinating thing. Perl has a special symbol called __end. And that says to Perl, this is the end of the script. And Perl stops reading at that point. Now, if you don't supply Perl a script name, it reads from stdin. But if it's reading from stdin, it stops at end and leaves the file descriptor in place. Which means you can take a stdin/stodout processor script, SSH across to another system, invoke Perl, squirt the fat pack across the wire, squirt an underscore end, and at that point Perl starts executing and you can send your input over the SSH pipe as well, and it runs as if you'd already installed the thing on the far side. Except the only thing you ever needed on the server was the Perl binary that already came with the distro. That's zero installation. There are a couple of caveats to Fatpacker. Because it's an embedding trick, it can't handle compile stuff, but at the point at which you're handling compile stuff, you need to think about OS and architecture specificity and stuff anyway. And at that point, you really want to be looking at a full solution like Parpacker. Or, to be entirely honest, what I do in those cases is just rsync the local libout. Because at the point at which there's a bunch of compile code involved, we're already kind of out of the realms of simple, yeah? CPAN minus is switching to Fatpacker as of the next release. And I'm hoping to see more and more little Perl command line tools following the same principles, so we get a tradition building up of systems utilities that you can just deploy via an SCP or a So I claim, even as a grumpy old sysadmin, it's a great time to be scripting Perl. And you should try it. Join us. Resistance is futile, resistors are color-coded. Thank you very much.
We have time for a few questions before people head off.
Especially with MySQL and PHP, you talk about copying the library being included in the main program, so linking together. Doesn't Fatpack have the same mistake?
No, because it includes the right version rather than the broken bullshit one that PHP shipped.
But it's including potentially a different version of the library from...
No, it's including the exact version of the library that's on your system that you tested against.
with which the program works.
Yes. So, no. Please don't get PHP all over my nice script.
Any more questions? Someone's back.
Yeah, you mentioned about the fact that Perl is broken on Red Hat or something. Can you enlighten a bit more about it?
Red Hat has this tendency to ship a bunch of random patches to Perl, which means it doesn't behave the same way. It took approximately 3 years for us to convince them that they tried to backport a patch from a later version of Perl to an earlier version, which caused a 30 times slowdown on a lot of common code. And it took 2.5 years for us to actually get them to understand that this was a bad thing and maybe they should ship a release that fixed it. There have been various other bits of fun like that. Another one they did that was really great was, for a while, they included the kernel version in the Perl architecture name. So every time you upgraded your kernel across the point release, you had to recompile every Perl module on the system. It's just a history of, why did you do that? Moments. I would argue that Red Hat Perls are the single biggest cause of billable hours for Shadowcat that we would much rather build doing something useful for our clients after MySQL. Oh, right, if anybody thinks of any good questions later, come ask me down the pub. Cheers.
Thank you very much.